In the 250 years since the founding of the United States of America, a wide variety of technological advancements have been used within our armed forces. However, one in particular saw its introduction coincide with the beginning of these United States rising to become the most powerful nation in history, that being the tank. Join me as we explore the birth of American armor during the First World War. While tanks would revolutionize the way wars were fought on land, the United States was and continues to be a maritime nation. As far back as the Revolutionary War, ships and boats were used in the fight for freedom from British rule, such as the gunboat Philadelphia, now housed in the Smithsonian, or the later USS Constitution, which remains on display today with a crew of active duty naval personnel. As we entered the 20th century, however, the US fleet continued to grow larger, boasting more and more powerful warships, and just like this video is a celebration of the history of American armor, today's sponsor, World of Warships, is celebrating our naval history. World of Warships is a free-to-play tactical naval combat game featuring hundreds of ships from the US Navy and many other nations around the world. Among these are some of the most iconic American ships in history, from ships of the Great White Fleet which circumnavigated the globe under orders from Teddy Roosevelt to the massive battleships of the Second World War. Right now, you can join in on the 250th US anniversary event until July 15th, and both new and returning players can get a ton of rewards by using the code USA250. This includes 1 million credits, 7 days of premium, 500 doubloons, a patriotic Stars and Stripes camo, the premium cruiser USS Albany, and premium destroyer USS Smith. On top of that, after 10 battles, new players can choose an additional bonus ship of either the South Carolina, St. Louis, or Wick. Start playing today with my link and the USA250 code, and a huge thanks to World of Warships, not just for sponsoring this video, but also for their continued support of museum ships around the world, helping to preserve naval history. Enough about boats though, let's move back to dry land for our main topic. It would be quite impossible within the limits of a single article even to outline the work of the various units of American tanks, for though comparatively few in number, they were exceedingly active. But it may be possible by telling something of the battles of a few typical units to shadow forth in a degree the sort of difficulties and dangers which they all confronted, and the splendid spirit of heroism with which they met dangers which were not only often, but ordinarily even greater than those encountered by the men of other branches of the service on the battlefront. The Stars and Stripes, June 13th, 1919. By the time the United States entered the First World War, the tank had already seen its combat debut during the Battle of Flers-Courcelette. However, unlike their delayed entry into the war, American adoption of this new weapon of war would be swift. Aside from eventually birthing some of the most famous tanks in history, these early origins would also include some of the most famous men in the history of our armed forces. In fact, the rapid adoption of this technology is largely thanks to General John J. Pershing, one of only 3 men in U.S. history to be awarded the rank of General of the Armies, the highest rank possible, alongside George Washington and Ulysses S. Grant. Upon his arrival in Paris in June of 1917, Pershing immediately set to work ordering studies of the methods of war now being used by the French and British. Despite limited knowledge of the tank prior to the entry into the war, it was quickly realized by the committee assigned to study these weapons that they were no passing fad. This was likely helped by the fact the US military had witnessed the capabilities of mobile firepower against Pancho Villa just prior to joining the global conflict. Many of the men we will discuss today had been part of the expedition into Mexico, which made use of airplanes and motorized equipment under the leadership of General Pershing. Having already seen the success of this new style of warfare, heavier firepower propelled by tracks and featuring armor capable of stopping small arms fire was the obvious next step. In response to this, a single officer eager for action and who had previously worked with Pershing would be assigned the task of creating a new tanker training school. The man chosen for the job was a young Captain George S. Patton Jr., who would officially become America's first tanker, entering training with our nation's oldest ally, France, in the fall of 1917. Following this training, he would set to work establishing a tank school for further American tankers to train at upon arrival in France. As America had not yet built a tank of her own, these soldiers would be trained to operate both the smaller French Renault under Patton as well as the larger British tanks by the British. By the end of 1917, the new tank corps had grown to a whopping 3 men, all officers, with those being Colonel Samuel D. Rockenbach, a cavalry officer, Captain Patton, and Patton's assistant, First Lieutenant Brain. However, before they had even received their first tanks, recruits began arriving for training with the fledgling group. Because of this, many of these early tankers were partially trained using wooden dummies until March 23, 1918. This is when the first borrowed tanks finally did arrive, and Patton is said to have unloaded them all personally, as he was the only American to have driven a tank at that point. These recruits would go on to form the 1st Tank Unit in the U.S. Army, the 1st Provisional Tank Brigade, consisting of the 326th Light Tank Battalion and the 327th Light Tank Battalion equipped with French-built Renaults. Along with this, Patton would order the creation of a patch for the new unit, resulting in the now iconic 3-colored triangle, with the blue representing infantry, yellow representing cavalry, and the red representing artillery. Additionally, the 301st Heavy Tank Battalion, made up of soldiers from Camp Meade in Maryland, were trained in Britain and equipped with British Mark Vs as part of the British 4th Tank Brigade. Training was not limited to Europe, however, with a young Captain Dwight D. Eisenhower being assigned to train tankers at the first U.S.-based tank school established in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, and named Camp Colt. Between Camp Colt and several other training camps, by the end of the war, America's tank units had grown to 29, though only 4 of these would see action. The last of these to reach Europe would be the 331st Light Tank Battalion, making up the 306th Tank Brigade, although it is unclear how much action they saw, with the war practically over by that point. The first of these American tankers to see their combat debut would do so near the end of 1918 on September 12th, when tanks of the 1st Tank Brigade, commanded by Patton, supported the St. Mihiel offensive. Though this would not be a glorious debut, with mud, shell holes, and German fire claiming many of their tanks, the words of Patton showcase the spirit of these pioneering men. "No tank is to be surrendered or abandoned to the enemy. If you are left alone in the midst of the enemy, keep shooting. If your gun is disabled, use your pistols and squash the enemy with your tracks. If your motor is stalled and your gun broken, still the infantry cannot hurt you. You hang on, help will come. In any case, remember, you are the first American tanks. You must establish the fact that American tanks do not surrender." In a perfect example of this, Patton, upon hearing of the muddy and broken ground the tanks were struggling to traverse, immediately went forward on foot. After meeting General Douglas MacArthur, who was leading the infantry, he quickly took charge of his tankers and managed to get 5 of the tanks unstuck to support infantry pinned down by German fire. Despite them running out of fuel, a resupply towed in by more tanks allowed them to refuel and head the advance, resulting in the capture of 4 field guns and 16 machine guns. Continuing to lead these tanks on foot, Patton himself was injured during the later Meuse-Argonne offensive, with a shot hitting him in the leg. Despite this, he continued to issue orders for an hour before being evacuated and was later awarded the Distinguished Service Cross for his actions. Following this, Major Sereno E. Brett of the 344th assumed command. He similarly showed immense resolve, losing 3 separate tanks to the mud before continuing on foot to lead the remaining tanks. As for the 301st Heavy Tank Battalion, they would see action on the 27th of September against the Hindenburg Line. This would result in an extremely bloody battle for them, with only 10 of the 40 tanks making it to the objective, with several lost to friendly mines due to poor communication. More were lost to enemy fire or breakdowns, with a total of 112 casualties, with 3 officers and 20 tankers being killed, and many more severely wounded. Despite this, their fighting spirit survived, with the 301st assisting in the capture of Brancourt, with 1 tank capturing a German battery by flanking it from behind. Words truly cannot describe the bravery shown by these tankers who just months before had likely never even heard of a tank, let alone seen one with their own eyes. To then have enough faith in their officers and the machines themselves to assault fortifications and weaponry they similarly had never experienced before is simply incredible. It seems like practically every story you read of their actions is as incredible as the last, and I highly recommend reading some of them for yourselves. The birth of American armor would not be a purely European affair, however, and as these heroic tankers were given a baptism of fire, the engineers back home were hard at work kickstarting domestic tank production. With the French and British already struggling to build enough tanks for themselves, American assistance in production was the obvious next step. The first of these to see production was an American version of the French Renault, modified to fit the American measurement system rather than metric. Alongside this, plans for a so-called international tank, also known as the Liberty Tank or Mark 8, were underway. This was a continuation of the British rhomboid designs, with the Americans, British, and French working together to construct them. The United States would be responsible for producing the engine, transmission, and other drivetrain components. The British would supply armor plates, guns, and ammunition, with final assembly completed in France. However, similarly to the remaining American tank units, these would not be ready in time to see combat by the time World War I ended. Some of these would still be produced after the war though, with them becoming the first American heavy tank and serving alongside the M1917 light tank. World War I would also see the first true domestic design for a tank, courtesy of the Ford Motor Company in the form of the Ford 3-ton special tractor. Smaller than the M1917, it was equipped with a 30 caliber machine gun with potential consideration for a 37mm armed option as well. With Ford reportedly estimating they could produce up to 100 of these per day by the spring of 1919, it may have been inferior in many ways to the French Renault, but it hinted at the sleeping giant of American industry which would finally awaken just a few decades later. Without having been there to witness these events firsthand, it can be hard to adequately describe just how important the experiences of American soldiers during the First World War were, not just for tanks, but the future of the US military as a whole. However, for the tankers, I think General Pershing put it best in his final report by saying, "While our tank corps had limited opportunity, its fine personnel responded gallantly on every possible occasion and showed courage of the highest order." At the time of writing this, it has been 108 years since the first American tankers saw combat, nearly as long as the time separating those men from the founders of the nation they fought for. Though death has since claimed them all, I hope this video can serve to preserve even just a small part of their legacy and one of the most significant events in the 250 years since the founding of this great nation. Regardless of personal beliefs or disagreements, our world would not exist without their contributions and sacrifices, and it is our responsibility to preserve their memory for the benefit of future generations. Though little remains today from the early days of American armor, you can still find small glimpses into the past in places such as Gettysburg. Alongside the memorials to the many Americans who died there during our nation's Civil War, you can find artifacts of the tank training school in the museum there, which I visited several years ago myself and cannot recommend highly enough. A better symbol of this is one you might miss if you aren't careful though. Along the west side of Emmitsburg Road sits a humble evergreen, towering above a small plaque commemorating both President Eisenhower and the birthplace of the American Tank Corps. Planted 73 years ago by veterans of the Tank Corps who trained there, it continues to grow alongside us, a reminder of the famous quote, "A society grows great when old men plant trees in whose shade they shall never sit." Thank you all so much for watching, and before you go, I just have one request for all of you. Whether you have a family member who has served in an American tank or one that has served with the tank forces of another nation, please share their story with us in the comments. It's easy to view history as just events that occurred in the past, forgetting that each of us is a living piece of that history. Thank you, and I look forward to reading your stories. Thanks again to World of Warships for sponsoring this video and their contributions to preserving and sharing history. Remember to use the code USA250 through my link below to get that special bonus pack, and let me know which of the 3 ships you choose after your first 10 battles. Thanks as always to my ConelyFans for their continued support of this channel, and to all of you for putting up with my rambling at the end. I plan to dedicate the next month of videos to covering more stories of American tanks, so let me know which you'd like to see me cover. Hope to see you back here again soon.